I was 19 when I found out I was pregnant. I was the daughter of a Baptist minister, dating the son of a Methodist minister, and we were both attending a private Christian college. I wasn't someone you'd expect to be found in an abortion clinic, but I also was sexually active, understanding that I had the legal right to an abortion. My church was silent on the topic. I didn't really know what I felt about it. I always knew it was an eraser should a mistake happen. The day I missed my period, I knew in my heart I was pregnant, and I was terrified. I didn't know how I could bring that shame on my family, and the only place I could turn to for a confidential pregnancy test was Planned Parenthood. As I walked into that clinic that day, I was pretty sure that I was pregnant, but I didn't know what was going to happen. I didn't know what an abortion procedure was like, and in the back of my mind, I thought I could take a pill, and it would all go away. As I sat with the counselor that day, I want to tell you she was very kind. She was compassionate, and she seemed to really care. And as my pregnancy test went positive, my whole world shattered. Instantly, I panicked. I felt like I was caught in a trap. It had been hypothetical before that, but now it was real. She looked at me and she said, "Well, you're pregnant. What are you going to do?" And I looked at her straight in the eye and said, "I'm a good Christian girl. I have to have an abortion." She said, "Well, not all Christian girls have abortion." Now, she shocked me when she said that, because in my world, all Christian girls had abortions. Many of my friends had been pregnant, and not one had chosen to take a baby to term. But she pushed me and she said, "Well, what are your reasons for having an abortion?" Well, my first was the classic. My mother would have a nervous breakdown. You know, I'm 42 years old right now. Looking back on that, my mother probably would have had a nervous breakdown, but she would have loved her grandchild. I never gave her a chance to be there for me. My second reason was my boyfriend was waiting out in the car, and he had already been very clear on what his intentions were. He said, "If you're pregnant, Sydna, I don't want to be a father. There's no part of me that wants to be a dad. You have to have an abortion. If you don't have an abortion, I'll tell everyone it's not my child. You'll be on your own, and that's not a really great way to bring a child into the world without a father." My final reason was I was attending a private Christian college who had a policy of expelling pregnant unwed students. Those were three pretty strong reasons in my eyes. I never once thought about what God would say. As I gave her the reasons, this dear lady looked at me and she says, "Well, sounds like you thought everything out." You know, I was 19, I was scared, I was pregnant, I was highly emotional, I hadn't thought anything out. But needless to say, I thought abortion was a solution. She looked at me and she says, "You know, there's only one problem here. You're not far enough along. We need to wait at least 3 weeks to make sure that you are far enough along so when the procedure is done, it's complete." I thought, oh my goodness, that means I'm going to have to go back and live in my mother's house for 3 weeks. I had a waiting period, but I didn't know how I was going to handle that waiting period. We determined that I would be back at school when it was time for the abortion. She pulled out a nice fat book of abortion providers. It seemed really thick. And she said, "Okay, you'll be in Indianapolis. Let's call. We'll make a long-distance phone call, and we'll get yourself an appointment." We set a day for the 3rd week in September. And I thought she was so kind to help me make that appointment. And as I left there, she said, "Be sure to tell them we sent you." Now, leaving that clinic, I thought, well, that's a little weird. Why would it matter who sent me? After all these years, I've come to learn that these organizations have a referral system. In other words, when I told that abortion clinic that the Planned Parenthood had sent me in that particular town, they more than likely got a financial kickback, a portion of my abortion revenues. And to me, to be paid for helping someone make an abortion decision isn't counseling. It's an industry. As I left that clinic, though, I thought she was kind enough that was the least I could do for her. And I headed across the parking lot, and that's when this war started inside of me. Being a good Christian girl, I had two voices going on in my head. Cartoon characters have this all the time. They have a devil on one side and an angel on the other, and they're going back and forth and giving you two different reasons why you should make a certain decision. The devil, I'll say, was telling me, "You're too young to have a baby. You're 19. How can you be a parent? You don't even have a college degree. You've seen other women struggle as single parents. Why would you want to do this to a child?" The angel on the other side, which was the Holy Spirit, said, "You're pregnant. You've always wanted to be a mother. This is a baby. You're going to be blessed. And I started feeling the joy any woman would feel at understanding she was pregnant. And I thought, just for an instant, there's one little hope in my heart. And that's that this boyfriend waiting in the car might change his mind, might say, marry me and have our baby. I thought, you know, if that happened, my mother would be okay. We could make a life for ourselves, and we'd have our love child, our baby. And as I approached that vehicle where my boyfriend sat, that hope was in my heart. And as I opened the car door, this boy understood my emotions. He read the expression on my face. He knew I was pregnant because it was very evident I'd been crying. And he looked at me and he said, if you think I'm going to marry you and have this baby, you're wrong. Abortion is the best for both of us. It's not right to bring a child into this world. And in that instant, that hope that I had probably for all of 15 seconds just went right down into the pit of my stomach. And I resigned myself to an abortion decision. For 3 weeks, I struggled with that decision because these two voices were going back and forth in my head. In my heart, I knew abortion was wrong, despite the fact that I had never been educated that way. In my heart, I knew it was a baby. I knew I was a mother. But I was struggling to distance myself from those emotions, and it took an awful lot of emotional energy to do that. When I found myself in my mother's house again, I had a secondary hope, as many of us do. I thought, if my mother looked at me and asked me what was wrong, I could be honest with her. And the strangest thing happened. Years later, she would say, I knew something was wrong. I never thought it was a crisis pregnancy. But I just felt like I was better off not knowing what was wrong. And for a long time, I'd try to get her eyes. I'd try to look her deep into her eyes and have her look at me and say, something's wrong, Sydna, what's wrong? And she always avoided my eyes. Bless her heart, she didn't know what else to do. So many of us, as I've sat back through all these years, I know that thousands of us wanted someone to ask what was wrong. We couldn't bring ourselves to say the truth. And even now, as I sit here sharing with you, I know that it's one of the most terrifying things I can do is confess to an abortion choice. And the only reason I do it is so that you'll understand what it's like to walk through the doors of an abortion clinic and understand what it's like to live with this pain and know this choice for what it is, and not an easy one. Frederica Matthews Green, who's a friend of mine, gave a perfect quote. She said, a woman doesn't want an abortion like she wants an ice cream cone or a Porsche, but like an animal caught in a trap who gnaws off its own leg. That's the way I felt. I wanted someone to open that trap door, but I couldn't open it myself. For 3 weeks, my boyfriend was extremely supportive. During those times where I was wavering, he'd come back and say, you know, there's a life for us. We can get married. There's another day to have children when we're all prepared, when we can afford it. I was scared to death. I didn't even research what an abortion was. I didn't know it was a surgical procedure. I didn't know that there were consequences to it, that it could hurt me internally, that it could affect me emotionally, psychologically, spiritually, and physically. Never even asked those questions. I was 19. And that's one thing I love about pregnancy care centers, is that had I walked into a pregnancy care center for my test, they would have told me the risks. They would have showed me how developed my child was at 6 to 7 weeks. They would have told me that they would have helped me had everyone turned away and walked against me. They would have helped me. Instead, I was all alone, trusting a boyfriend who had an ulterior motive in encouraging me to make this choice. As I left my mother's house 3 weeks later to head back to college, something inside of me snapped. I grew very angry with her. I started to blame her for this decision. Had she been emotionally accessible, maybe I wouldn't have to have this abortion. In other words, it wasn't my decision. I was making it for everyone else. I was starting to distance myself from the guilt that I knew I was going to feel for making this choice on my own. It was a Saturday morning that we drove to Indianapolis. My boyfriend was very supportive all the way up until that point. He was holding my hand. He was guiding me. I had started to do a few more drugs. I had been pretty drug-free up to that point, but I was an emotional roller coaster, so I started smoking pot, a little bit here and there. But that morning I was clear-headed. I didn't know where I was going. I didn't know how I was headed. I didn't know what the procedure was going to be like. I just knew I had to do it. And as we arrived at that clinic and he parked the car, he looked at me and he said, "I want you to know something." And I said, "What?" Hoping he'd say, "Marry me and have our children." I was waiting for that all the way up until this point. He said, "I want you to know I'm not going with you." I said, "You're what?" He said, "I'm not going up there with you. I'm not going to be in a room waiting for you. That room's full of weeping women and I don't need to be there. I'll wait in the car. You're on your own." And I took a deep breath, and that anger that I had started against my mother started to turn against this man. I thought, "You're abandoning me here. I have to do this alone?" I didn't think I could do it alone. I didn't think I could do anything. Certainly didn't think I could parent. But I got out of the car somehow and I slammed the door, and for some reason there was this image of the cowardly lion in the Wizard of Oz who's just saying, "Courage, I have courage, I can do this." I was trying to emotionally prep myself and push myself through that door. The devil on one side and the angel on the other were just yelling at each other by this point. I could barely hear. God was saying, "Leave here, flee this place. You can die here, Sydna. If you walk down that road, I'll be with you. There'll be someone down there to help you. Trust in me. I'm the creator of this life." This other voice was saying, "There's no one down that road. There's no one to help you. You're on your own. How can you even consider bringing a child into this world under those conditions? The best thing you can do right now is abort this baby." I actually thought that aborting this child was going to be good for him. I was shaking as I opened the door to that clinic, and I knew that it was on the 4th floor because I had seen the suite number. So I climbed those 4 flights of stairs. I still don't know how I did it. And when I opened the door, I thought, once I'm in this door, I'm not going back. There's no turning around. I never thought that I could leave at any moment. I thought that once I was in there, I was trapped and the decision was over. The door opened and it closed behind me. And my boyfriend had been right. Everyone in that waiting room was crying. All shapes and sizes, all different faces. And I looked around the room and I wondered several things. Why we all were so sad about this. If this was supposed to be a good choice and a right choice, why was it so brutal? I went over and paid my $250. I told the woman about the Planned Parenthood that had referred me. She was very kind. And I sat down and I tried to figure out where I was and what was going to happen to me in the next few hours. It was a horror show. You know, what was behind that door? What was going to happen? And I started to memorize the faces, trying to occupy my mind and distance myself from these two warring voices that were screaming at me. And when the door opened, a woman came out and she had scrubs on. They looked like medical scrubs. I assumed she was a nurse, a medical professional. And despite the fact that I was the last one in the clinic, mine was the first name called. And as I followed her down this long hallway, I can tell you it was cold. Not environmentally, but spiritually. What I didn't realize was I had just walked into the lion's mouth. I'd walked into a place where I would never be the same when I came out. I never thought at 19 years of age that I could do anything that would so traumatically impact the rest of my life. I followed her down that hall, growing more terrified in every step. And she led me into a little office, and she sat down, she had me down, she said, "Sit." She said, "Sign it." Put a piece of paper in front of me. She said, "Sign it." And I looked up at her. She wasn't compassionate like all the other people I had seen. She was pretty cold. And I said, "What's this?" And she said, "It's your counseling." Now, I was 19. I knew that counseling wasn't on a piece of paper. But I looked down at it, and I saw the word adoption. And I thought, oh my goodness, if my mother's going to have a nervous breakdown, if my boyfriend leaves me, if I lose my college career, my baby would be my prize. Why would I give my child away? I thought, no, abortion's much better than adoption. Never, ever considering that adoption meant my child could live. My baby would be here today. And you know what? That would be quite a comfort if he were alive in this world today instead of dead. But something inside of me got a voice. I know it was the Holy Spirit because I wasn't thinking this question. I looked up at this nurse, grabbed her hand, looked her deep in the eyes, and I said, will this affect me emotionally or psychologically? Now, I didn't even know what those terms really meant. But I believe the Holy Spirit was trying to get my attention. And she looked down at me with a very cruel smile, and she says, oh no, it'll make your life better. There's other days for you to have a baby, honey. She was a medical professional. I wanted to hear that. I wanted to hear it was going to make my life better. Please tell me why I'm doing this, because it's killing me. And I accepted it. I signed the piece of paper. She led me down another hall to another room, gave me a hospital gown, the normal one, ties in the back, and gave me 2 Valium, and waited outside until I changed and took the Valium. By this point, I had it pretty much figured, since I was naked under this hospital gown, that I was in for something a little bit surgical related, but I still wasn't thinking there. I had my head in the sand. What I don't know won't hurt me. She led me into a final room, and it was a closet. It was probably 6 by 9, and there were 3 other women waiting in there, and we were 2 and 2 facing each other. And as I sat down, the door closed, and we were all alone in this room, the 4 of us. And I thought, okay, I'm getting really nervous. I don't know what's going to happen out there. Why don't I talk? I'm the type of person that talks. And I looked at the woman sitting next to me. I said, so what's your story? And she looked back at me, and she says, well, I'm the mother of 2, and I don't want a 3rd. I said, you're married? And she said, mm-hmm. Very matter-of-factly. And I said, and you have 2 children? She said, yeah. Now, in my heart, I didn't think that abortion was for anyone but teenagers. It never struck me that married women would be having abortions. And instantly, I judged her. How could she do that? She had a family. She had a place. Why would she abort a child like that? Here I'm sitting having an abortion myself, and I'm judging another woman for having hers. Now, I know right now I'm almost to menopause. I'm 42 years old. If I got pregnant today, it would be a crisis, as much as it would have been as a teenager. I know many women my age are finding their way into abortion clinics. This isn't something that's isolated to teenagers. It happens to any woman at childbearing years. But I got real mad at this woman, and I didn't want to talk to her anymore. So I focused my attention on the woman right across from me. And she was crying. She was just sobbing. And by this time, the Valium was kicking in. I was getting a little bit more relaxed, and I thought, get a grip, woman. If you're going to do this, do this. Don't be a basket case. And then I looked at the woman in the corner, and she was no more than 12, staring straight ahead like a zombie. And I was shocked by that one. And I couldn't even approach her to talk to her. And as I was trying to determine what I was going to do next, the door opened, and all 4 of us jumped. It was that difficult of a moment. And they called my name first. And as I left that room, I walked into the abortion chamber. There's horror stories, and many of us have had that dream. We wake up and someone's operating us, and there's all these surgical equipment, and there's scalpels and there's scissors, and you're terrified, and you're like, put me to sleep, put me to sleep. I'm awake. Don't operate on me while I'm awake. Well, I had no idea that abortion was surgery. I had an inkling, but I went past 4 big, huge trays of surgical equipment, scalpels, all different things. And I was starting to get more and more terrified. I was shaking. There were 4 beds lined up with a curtain in between them. I was led to the 4th bed. I passed 4 of these surgical trays. I got myself up on that 4th bed with the help of a nurse. All the time, these 2 voices are warning. God saying, flee, get out of here. You will never be the same. You can leave, run, go out that door. This other voice was saying, maybe your boyfriend's going to come through there. Maybe he's going to be that knight in shining armor and rescue you. Not. He's sitting down in the car waiting for you. I wanted to be rescued. I wanted someone to take me out of there. I was a little girl. I was 19 years old. What am I doing in this place? What's going on here? What's going to happen to me? I'm trusting strangers who I don't even know. And then all of a sudden, this nurse got my attention, who had helped me up on this table. She was putting my legs in stirrups, and she says, now look at me, honey. And I looked at her, and she held my hand, and she said, I want you to know you can hold my hand through this. and being a teenager. I said, why would I want to hold your hand? And she said, well, because you didn't pay extra for anesthesia, and this is going to hurt. And I thought, oh, this is going to hurt? And before I had enough gumption or enough terror in my body, the abortionist was standing in front of me. I had no room to flee, or I didn't think I did. And he had a mask over his face. He never addressed me directly. But he did a very quick exam, brutal exam. It hurt. And he said, 7 weeks, lay her down. They thumped me down. Now I can tell you, I've had 3 children, natural childbirth. I didn't have drugs at all through those pregnancies. No epidurals, through those deliveries, no epidurals. I had them all together with as much pain as you can have giving birth. If you combined all 3 of those labors and deliveries, it would never equal the pain I experienced that day. The next day, I would have his handprints, the abortionist's handprints, fully on my thighs in bruise form. I couldn't wear shorts. They were there for 3 weeks before those bruises left. He literally had to hold me down. As the instruments entered my body, I started to scream. Bloody murder. I know there was no way anybody could not hear my screams. Those 3 women in that closet room over there waiting for their abortions, they heard me. They had to have heard me. They put their hand over, the nurse put her hand over my mouth trying to stifle my screams, nearly suffocated me. By the time it was over, I was in total shock. I have never in my life then and never since experienced the pain. The sound was something completely different. Every time I go into a dentist's office and they drill in to have my cavities, I'm right back there. I'm transported back to that sound. A vacuum cleaner will remind me of that sound. Over the years, the trauma of noises to take me back to that moment in time has been something I've struggled to even handle. Only with the grace of God have I made it this far. I can't tell you how long the procedure went on, probably no more than 10 minutes. All I know is I was hysterical all the way through. And in my heart, the only thing I could keep was, God, please forgive me. I knew in that moment, the Holy Spirit, I believe, told me, maybe it was my own motherly instinct that God gave me that told me, is they're ripping your child limb from limb. Your baby's dying. I knew it. I knew I was a willing participant of it, but I couldn't stop it. Like a lamb is led to the slaughter is dumb, I laid there and let them take my unborn child. When it was over, they lifted me up. They literally pulled my head up, and I went into a dizzy spell, and I almost lost my balance. They shoved me, not sweetly, off the bed, and I heard a door open, and I saw the mother of 2 who didn't want a third coming into that room. And I couldn't speak, but I wanted to say, run, flee. Didn't you just hear me scream? Get away from here. I wanted to save her. I wanted to stop her from going through this emotion, this terror. And she was looking at me, and our eyes met, and I knew she had heard my screams. But she was letting them lead her right to that bed, the second bed. All of a sudden I realized that's why there was 4 in there. That's why there's 4 beds. It's assembly line. We're going 1 down the road. And all of a sudden I looked at this jar that was next to us, and it was filled with blood. And I had the image of arms and legs in there. And I thought, oh my goodness, I can't think of arms and legs. Now knowing fetal development, my child at 7 weeks had arms and legs. I believe the Lord was trying to tell me, you've lost a baby, Sydna. But I couldn't emotionally even handle that concept. As the door opened to the next room where they were leading me, I heard another sound. And this is based on the verse in Jeremiah that I used to start my ministry. It's called A Voice is Heard in Ramah, Jeremiah 31:15. A voice is heard in Ramah, mourning and great weeping, Rachel weeping for her children and refusing to be comforted because her children are no more. Every woman in there had just lost a child, and the sound was unique. And I went in and joined that chorus. It's one thing to scream while the procedure is being done to you. It's very much different to hear someone else screaming. Everything in my body wanted to go rescue the mother of 2 who didn't want a third as her screams started to penetrate the walls of that room. But an interesting thing happened. They say in Nazi Germany, when they were transporting Jews on cattle cars, that they would hear the Jews screaming inside. The townspeople would hear them. And yet, when they were in church and one of these cars would go by, they would be told to sing a little louder to drown out that noise. Our screams, as that mother of two who didn't want a third started to scream, the noise in the room elevated to compensate for that. When that woman came into the room, I couldn't look at her. I was responsible. I didn't stop it. And the next thing I knew is that the 12-year-old was next in line. And somehow, some way, I stopped and didn't hear her anymore.